Sure,
put
sounds
the events
good.
on it.
We can cut. We
Okay,
can
great.
always cut. So.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's first live event of 2023. Thank you. We did have one at the end of last year. Be sure. Have to check mics. So I want to tell you about, I'm Georgia Kelly, by the way, the director of Praxis, and I want to tell you about some of the upcoming programs before we begin today. Next Friday, on May 19th at 4 p.m., we have a free public service program on Zoom with Dr. Mary McDevitt. She was formerly the head of Marin General Hospital, and she's giving a program that is called Things You Didn't Learn About Medicare Advantage Plans from TV Commercials. So everything you want to know about the advantage plans or disadvantage plans, however you look at them, she will be talking about it and taking your questions. And she knows this stuff inside and out. So I highly recommend that you come to it. If you send us an email, you will get the Zoom link for it. If you're a Praxis member, you will automatically get the Zoom link. And there are membership forms on the back table if you want to become a member. So that's next Friday, and we'll have a lot more programs on Zoom coming up. The ones that I've already scheduled will be Jody Evans on June 23rd. She will have just returned from a month in China, so she'll be talking about our relationship with China. And July 28th, we have wonderful radio TV personality Tom Hartman, who will be with us to talk about his latest book in the Hidden History series. So, and in September, probably many of you know, this will be our 12th seminar at the Mondragon Cooperatives in Spain. It's a week long, and it's an in-depth experience of not only the Mondragon businesses and their cooperatives, but also the culture that helps this thrive as it does. So that will be September 10th to 16th. Now, and anyone here who would like to come to the reception, you can still get tickets for that. So I just wanted to mention that right now. And then unfortunately today, Andrew Kimbrell cannot be with us. He got a herniated disc and is unable to travel. However, he agreed to do an hour with us on Zoom, so everyone who's here can come to our Zoom program on Thursday online. And if we have your email, if you pay by credit card, we have your email, you will get the link for that program. It'll be an hour long, and we'll deal with Andrew's work and have Q&A period after. So that will be Thursday at 4 o'clock. Now I want to talk about the speaker we've got today, Randy Hayes, who I've known a long time, and he has spoken at several Praxis events before today. In fact, 10 years ago, I think it was 8 years ago, he was here in Sonoma with Andy. So he's going to talk about the Great Transformation, Roadmaps to an Ecological Civilization. He was the founder and executive director of Rainforest Action Network, as you probably know, and I love this quote from the Wall Street Journal. Described him as an environmental pit bull because of his work and how he works. So today he is in Washington, D.C., working there with Andy Kimbrell and Brent Blackwelder in Foundation Earth, which is a think tank, and he is the executive director of that foundation. And their work is basically challenging to develop the big picture of a new human order, including economic models, legal governance systems, educational programs, and healthcare systems, and more, I'm sure. That work in a larger order of the planet's life support systems. He is a veteran of many high visibility corporate accountability campaigns and has advocated for the rights of indigenous peoples throughout the world. He served for 5 years as the president of the City of San Francisco Commission on the Environment, and for 2.5 years as the director of sustainability in the office of then Oakland Mayor Jerry Brown. He holds a master's in environmental planning from San Francisco State University, and he was one of the original inductees in the National Environmental Hall of Fame. So please welcome Randy Hayes.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you all for coming today, including way back there. We don't really need to ask ourselves, I don't think, if it's time for a great sort of societal U-turn to an ecological civilization. Those of you in California know from the recent extreme weather events that nature is clearly telling us it is time. Back in the 1970s, I was actually down in the Southwest near the Grand Canyon with the Hopi elders. And the elders pointed out to me that for the last 500 years, they have been living in a pirate world, saying, you live in one too. Well, around that same time, but over in Italy, a group of esteemed intellectuals, scientists, and naturalists were gathering together. They were concerned about the troubled waters around the world, and they formed the Club of Rome, and they commissioned a major report. A recent graduate from MIT's esteemed systems thinking program, Donella Meadows, and 2 other people wrote that report. It was called Limits to Growth, a report to the Club of Rome. The authors effectively climbed on top of the societal Titanic's conning towers looking ahead 50 years, and they saw the troubled waters. They saw the icebergs that humanity was about to slam into. And so they ran their projections, and they suggested scenarios, and they hoisted signal flags to the world at large. You know, over 12 million copies of that book were sold, and it was translated into about 37 languages. Heads of state from around the world were discussing it. But unfortunately, and yet predictably, the captains of industry and many other sort of economic pirates of the time attacked Donella in that report. And those that were in a position to act didn't. So where does that leave us now? It's 50 years later, right? Current societal systems won't transform themselves. We have to do that. Right? And we especially need business leaders who really plan to seek a more responsible approach. So what might get the job done? And more importantly, has anybody drafted a serious plan? And are they implementing it? And do they have the resources that they need? Economic ecologist Bill Reese counsels us, stop talking about what you want. Talk about how you're going to get it. This is no longer the age of ideas. I believe this century will be known as the age of implementation. And to do that, we need roadmaps to guide us to a better destination. So, not close enough? All right. Is that better?
Yes.
Well, to be clear, victory is not assured. Nature and society, as you well know, are in crisis. The insect world alone is down 40 to 70%. And wild mammals represent only 4% of mammal biomass, whereas humans and our domestic livestock now represent 96%. We want and deserve a better world, but so do the insects and the other wild animals. Fortunately, in this garden today and around the world, people are gathering to address this situation, and there really are many of us to work with. Andy Kimbrell and I are recently back from the world's largest environmental gathering. Last November in Egypt, we were at the UN climate meeting, COP27, and that was 50,000 people strong, just the tip of the iceberg of people concerned. We discussed plans, and Andy and I launched a new global coalition for ecological agriculture, because windows of opportunity, in fact, are starting to open up in a new way. But we have to be ready to jump through those windows. So today, I want to convey an important emerging plan that will move the needle meaningfully. It's not a plan to get to any utopia, right? It does buy us enough time to get other things done. First, the plan starts with 5 societal systems that need to shift. They're the economic system, the energy consumption system, the energy production system, the agricultural production system, and the planet's life support systems. With the economic system, our focus is in particular on government subsidy reduction to troublesome industries. With the energy consumption system, the focus is on stopping the manufacturing of useless stuff to save energy. With the energy production system, of course, it is to get to 100% renewable energy. And with the agricultural system, production system, it's to get to 100% ecological farming. And with the planet's life support system, it's really about protecting the web of life and halting our expansion into it. So to accomplish this, we need roadmaps in all 5 of these sectors. And realizing that it is hubris to think about changing the entire world all at once, this plan semi-humbly focuses on the G20 countries, the 20 largest economies. And that's because they represent 85% of the problem and 2/3 of the population. To reach them, we need powerful on-the-ground campaigns, certainly at the annual G20 meetings, but also in all of those countries year-round. Those campaigns will need hundreds of communities and millions of citizen advocates, demanding that their governments and businesses take action. And those campaigners will need literally billions of dollars to support their efforts. And finally, all of that needs to be backed up with a emotionally powerful public relations campaign. I believe that if we do all of that, we have a chance to buy time. It can all be kind of summed up with this one thought, that until we humans stop thinking of ourselves as the only important species on this planet, we are just kicking the can not very far down the road. I want to put this into context of what is scientifically required to meaningfully address the climate issue, which is only but a critical part of ensuring a livable planet. The world governments these days know far more about what needs to be done, and we need to highlight and rally behind some important objectives. The main objective is to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half each decade from now to 2050 to get to zero, right? Emissions come from both the burning of fossil fuels and the trashing of natural systems like tropical rainforests. 25%, in fact, of last year's greenhouse gases were from logging, clearing from agriculture, and livestock grazing. But importantly, nature could actually supply 1/3 of the overall emission reductions to get us to zero by 2050, and that's a lot. So with natural systems, we need to get them down to zero emission by 2030. And then with healthier natural systems, by 2040, they would be scrubbing 5 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions out of the air. And by 2050, even the healthier natural systems would be scrubbing 10 gigatons out of the air. And the roadmap to reach those kinds of objectives has actually already been written. It is called the Exponential Roadmap for Natural Climate Solutions. It's about 45 pages and actually not bad reading in the scheme of things. The multiple benefits of this work are really obvious. By stopping the trashing of oceans and forest habitats, this helps the fish and the insects and the other wild animals to strengthen resilience, right? And that will help get us the resilience that we really need, which is a resilient biosphere. This plan builds local economies by creating rural jobs. And as we deepen our carbon-rich fertile soils, we get better food security. So this is a chance to leave the world better off than we have. It would be building the stage to build an ecological civilization. The Paris Agreement itself is a kind of roadmap in the sense that it requires the 200 member countries to declare nationally determined commitments and to put them into publicly available country plans to show how they will each get that part of the work done. It's not a mandatory plan, which we wish it were, but it is still important to buy time. The 5 systems that I've outlined have pieces of the roadmap written. And starting with the economic system, it's really about reducing government subsidies to ecologically damaging industries. You know, think about mining, logging, drift net fishing, and oil and gas extraction. The roadmaps in this area are actually weak, but some components actually do exist. For instance, the International Monetary Fund and the OECD have written important reports on government subsidy reduction, perverse subsidy reduction, but they've taken no action. Subsidies, as you probably know, are essentially corporate welfare, right? It is tax dollars from the people. It is your dollars, right? And without corporate welfare, many of these extractive industries are not profitable. They are effectively the walking dead. They are zombie industries. And when zombie industries can no longer profit from the harm they do to nature, we advance the stage of transformation in a major kind of way. So some industries will shut down, but those workers will need guaranteed living wages or put to work in the restoration jobs that will have been created. With subsidy reductions, we actually get closer to the economic model, the ecological economic model that we need, right? The economic model that we want is a nature positive economy. It is a true cost economy that internalizes those pollution externalities. It is a deep green, steady state circular economy. You may have noticed, though, that we don't have that yet, and actually I have figured out why. It is clearly because Georgia Kelly and Andy Kimbrell have not been working hard enough. So I want you to put pressure on them. Now, importantly, with energy consumption system, which is energy use, it has to shrink. You know, renewable energy is important, but to me, the real focus should be on where does this energy go and what is it used for, right? And as well, because of the rarity of rare earth minerals and metals, and the almost assured trashing of natural systems from more mining projects, I believe that we'll never fully exchange one-to-one our current energy uses with renewable energy. Energy use reduction is in fact critical to getting to an ecological civilization. It's a lot easier to get to 100%, right, if you cut the path in half, right? Europe's increasingly influential degrowth movement is championing this kind of a shift. The degrowth movement says that we need a simplification, a great simplification of the consumption waste economy. There are 3 particular areas of reduction that I focus on. One is to degrow that waste economy. Less mining and manufacturing throughput means less energy. Overconsumption and waste reduction means, to me, simplify and require durable and repairable products. And then numbers reduction, a humanistic approach to human numbers reduction. Going to 10 or 12 billion of us wasting yet more stuff is not okay. And interestingly, the European Environment Agency now talks about growth without economic growth. And I quote, post-growth and degrowth economics are alternatives to mainstream conceptions of economic growth and offer valuable insights. The European Green Deal and other political initiatives for a sustainable future require not only technological change, but also in changes in consumption and social practices. So cutting energy use will help get humanity's foot off the throat of nature. With energy production system, we have the most detailed transformation maps already written. A well-known roadmap comes from the Stanford professor Mark Jacobson. Jacobson outlined a roadmap for the United States to meet its total energy needs by 2050 using 100% wind, water, and solar. And reportedly, he is looking at the rare earth minerals and metals issue. The Club of Rome has an ambitious Energy Transition Initiative. Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity, is a roadmap showing how we can move forward to meet world challenges. And there's something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a roadmap for forcing the phase out of bad energy and subsidy reduction to the fossil fuel energy. Our industry is part of that process. As we were to phase out the use of fossil fuel energy, we can still expect some use for strategic sectors like manufacturing, wind and solar, some agriculture, and first responders. The third plan that I'll mention is from the often questionable International Energy Agency. It recently shocked a lot of us by publishing a serious net zero 2050 roadmap. And then more recently, with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, they showed how we could cut 3 million barrels of oil per day rather quickly, and there's some movement on that in Europe. And as Georgia Kelly knows from her work with the co-ops in Spain, many of them are already addressing this need for energy reduction, consumption reduction, waste reduction, and more renewable energy. And as she mentioned, she does guide tours over there. You can see it for yourself directly. So agriculture is still the #1 cause of biodiversity loss. Economist Jeffrey Sachs recently stated that roadmaps in the energy sector are far better presented than in the agricultural sector. However, there are studies that show that we can feed the world with agroecology, ecological farming. And we need to assemble the proponents of those studies from the University of Minnesota, from the Millennium Institute, from the Center for Agroecology, International Center for Agroecology, and others, because they all have components for that roadmap. And importantly, there is a global food trade initiative at World Wildlife Fund called Codex Planetarius. My good friend Jason Clay is a vice president there, and he's one of the chief architects. He's been hobnobbing around the world with the CEOs of some of the major food companies like Unilever. They are proposing a mandatory new ecological standard in food trade globally, mandatory. Currently, the only mandatory standard in that sector is phytosanitary standards. But Codex Planetarius would require 8 ecological areas to be monitored. Things like biodiversity protection, soil quality, water quality and quantity. And I believe that this initiative would be a major contribution to reducing planetary harm. Unfortunately, they already have a lot of money behind it from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation from here in good old Northern California. The planet's life support system. 50% of annual human emissions are still being absorbed each year by the oceans and on the land. And without nature, our situation would be worse off. We would have surpassed that 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature rise that people rightly fear. Nature has its needs. When you extinct a species, you also lose its function in the web of life. If those are food pollinators, then that's of great concern to us. Every species in the web of life requires food, clean water, clean air, and a stable climate to preserve their planetary life support functions. We must protect enough of the natural world to sustain them. Currently, about 15% of the land and 7% of the oceans are protected. But in 2009, a group of conservation biologists started talking about and calling for half of the planet's land and ocean to be set aside from the industrial assault. Nature needs half left largely alone by us humans. And subsequently, a nice book called Half Earth by E.O. Wilson came out. Protecting half seemed like a pipe dream back then. It is not. There are quite advanced roadmaps now for addressing nature's needs. I'll just mention 3 of them. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature has a biodiversity framework. It's a global strategy for safeguarding nature. The framework requires $200 billion of investment each year, and the targets in the framework are to be measurable, scientifically underpinned, and have explicit outcomes. That framework's key elements are 4 goals for 2050, but more importantly, 30 specific targets by 2030. We also have something called the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. It's an intergovernmental group that was started by the UK, Costa Rica, and France, but now has over 100 countries as part of it. All right, and they are championing the central goal of protecting at least 30% of the world's land and oceans by 2030. That's just 7 years from now. Right, the 30 by 30 global target aims to halt the accelerating loss of species and their functions. Behind the scenes, it turns out it was actually at negotiations for a new ocean treaty. It was the High Ambition Coalition that was pushing the hardest for major protections in the high seas. And I have to ask you, when have nations ever had a high ambition for anything other than economic and military power? You know, this is about nature and people. It's getting things done. It's a very good result or development. The third plan is that exponential roadmap to natural climate solutions that I mentioned. And Conservation International's roadmap has outlined a path to get to net zero emissions from the land sector by the year 2030. Right? It calls for providing communities with the resources and to support land stewardship. It will provide countries with the knowledge to identify and activate their natural climate solutions, and it provides companies and financiers with clear paths to invest in natural climate solutions. So to summarize, this emerging plan is meant to move the needle meaningfully. It is a plan commensurate with the scale of the problem. It's not to get to any utopia in our lifetime, but it buys time. We focus on those 5 key systems: the economic system, the energy consumption system, the energy production system, the agricultural production system, all working together to save the planet's life support system. We target the 20 largest economies with roadmaps to guide these campaigns. We foster on-the-ground campaigns fighting for this package. In 20 areas, we enlist hundreds of communities and millions of citizen advocates demanding that their governments and businesses act. We get these campaigners literally billions of dollars to support their work, and we back all of this up with an emotionally powerful public relations campaign. As we do that, I believe we can manifest a real chance. And to help with this, Andy Kimbrell and I have set up a new group called Earth Advocacy Institute. Earth Advocacy's work will in part be to gather up the best roadmaps, to evaluate them, to identify what groups or countries are working to implement them, to identify the weak areas and the roadmaps that are still needed, to pull together wise people and complete a comprehensive set of these roadmaps, and to popularize that comprehensive set to the world at large, and especially to those with the power to act. Without an organized clarion call, it would be patently delusional to expect success. We are going to need your help to manifest this work. In conclusion, let me just leave you with these thoughts. Earth's top priority right now is for us humans to stop acting like we're the only important species on this planet, and to focus instead on a healthy planet for all. To do that, we need roadmaps and plans to get behind, like the kind of plan that I've tried to lay out today. It won't do everything, but it is a step forward that we desperately need. A healthy planet is worth fighting for, and working together is how we will get through this. The path to an ecological civilization can be our legacy. Thank you all very much for having me here today.
I think I might convince Randy to hold the microphone this time. Could you all hear very well? Yeah. Okay, great. We're going to do Q&A now, and I think we have a separate microphone for that. Yeah, over here. So this will be your microphone.
Close to the face.
Oh, so good.
Just getting the right pigs in the right place. Okay. So, if anyone wants to ask a question, yeah, I think for the most part, people will have to come up here to the front, but since you're already in the front, I will trip over this, so go ahead.
Hey Randy, how are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too, after so long. There's a lot of great plans and action that you have there, and I just think that a main cause for why we're having the issues that we are, there's too many human beings on the planet. So I'm wondering if population control is a good idea, trying to do something to reduce, the many billions down to maybe just a couple, because it was only about 100 some odd years ago that we found there were 1 billion people on the planet, and now there's 7, 8. And I think that is a main source of the issues that we're having, which is too many people consuming too many resources.
Well, humanity's, lack of a healthy relationship with the rest of the web of life, is part of that, of course, right? And overconsumption is certainly a part of that. The billion over-consumers are troublesome too. But numbers do matter, and I did mention numbers. To me, how do you humanistically get back to, say, 3 billion and then reevaluate what is the carrying capacity at that point in time on an already much damaged planet? So it is a vital part of my thinking and the work that I will pursue. And it's been understated in social change movements. And it was back in the 60s, 70s in the environmental movement. At least there was zero population group and people like Paul Ehrlich writing their books about the population bomb and subsequently the population explosion, right? And it may be coming back to the fore a bit more so.
All right, I'm going to have you come up. I think you'll need to come up when it's your turn. You'll be next year. That's why I want people to come up.
I will
Okay,
tighten up.
we're untangled. No, it's just a brief thing. That was such an immensely packed and dense conversation. I appreciate it so much. I've just finished 4 years on Petalima's Climate Action Commission. I wrapped it up with a presentation on consumption emissions or consumption-based emissions inventory. No surprise to you or anyone else, our emissions about 20 metric tons per person per year, or 5 times the global average. So we're busy consuming like crazy.
Yep.
So we got to turn that around for sure. So got to work with these ideas and a few others. So thank you.
Well, you walk into a grocery store and there's so many bad choices, or you walk into a large department store and there are so many bad choices. I don't think we need all of those bad choices, and a lot of them are, utilize that manufacturing and distribution process that externalizes the damage they do to nature. We certainly need to seriously get rid of the production of a lot of the stuff. I think of all the plastic toys imported in the United States in the last, say, 3 decades from China alone, right? And the hideous amount of pollution the poor Chinese have had to endure with just the plastic generation process itself, let alone all of the garbage and waste and such. So I think there's a lot we can do to essentially maintain the necessities of life, food, clothing, shelter, and a livable planet, but also the comfort items of life. Like I said, durable products, repairable products, and then you're not having to buy a new iPhone or whatever phone every 2 or 3 years. So,
And one of the other things is, with the population being a problem, it still is the first world people that use most of the resources and do most of the consuming. So we are more of a problem than, let's say, the global south, even though they have more people, correct?
No, I mean, our footprint, the ecological footprint analysis that we've all been, probably aware of over the last decade or two, is done out of Oakland, California, by Matisse Wackernagel and his team. And it shows that, I think globally, we're already utilizing essentially the goods and services, so to speak, of 3 planets, and that is not okay. And I think the changes have to happen, of course, primarily in the industrial north, but if you've traveled around the world, north, south, east, and west, there are a lot of industrial processes that are quite damaging, and so it is a global problem.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much for your work. I've been immersed in these issues. I'm an environmental lawyer. A few things I'd like to raise. First of all, I was really glad to hear you talk about degrowth, because it doesn't get talked about very much in public discourse for obvious reasons. On the other hand, you did at least imply that there would be jobs for everybody in the green energy technology industry, and I wonder if you really think that's something that you can guarantee or that you should promote as a basis for the transition. So that's a question. I'm also very familiar with Jacobson's work. Now, Jacobson's roadmaps assume continued economic growth, so there's some conflict there. Also,
There's a lot of conflict there.
yes, and I just sent Georgia a paper I just finished dealing with some of what I think are the problems with Jacobson's analysis. So anyway, those are my comments for now.
Well, the jobs that I think about are really much more in the restoration of natural systems, into terms of tens of millions of jobs that will be needed around the world. And that's tied into one of those objectives around, halting the net emissions from the natural world right now, but also getting, nature to be effectively like a Brita filter, scrubbing carbon out of the atmosphere. And I mentioned, 5 gigatons we need by 2040 and 10 gigatons by 2050. To have healthier systems, we not only have to protect what's left now, we've got to restore a lot of stuff, particularly, say, wildlife corridors between natural areas and things like that. So those are the jobs that I focus on, not so much the green energy sector. I think your point is valid there. And with Jacobson, he doesn't confront the growth for the sake of growth, the ideology of the cancer cell, as Edward Abbey told me once in the back of a hippie van in the Southwest. And that's why I say that the work of Earth Advocacy Institute will be to collect these plans. I mean, to Jacobson's credit, he's put a lot of work into a serious plan. It doesn't do everything that you or I think it needs to do, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, to use that old cliche. Let's look at what's useful in the work that he's done. Let's continue to point out what else we think needs to be done. And degrowth, when I mentioned degrowth, I wanted to throw in, and for those of you out here today who've never heard of degrowth, don't feel like you're out of the picture. It's moderately popular in Europe. It is not popular at all in North America. It is catching on, though, around the world. And it doesn't sort of mess around with its language, hence the title, degrowth. But I find the economic growth or no growth issue to be wrongly constructed. To frame it a little differently, I believe in selective growth. We need to grow where it's good to grow. Don't you want to grow your personality and your knowledge of history, and don't you want to, as a teenager, grow your muscles or something? And where do we need to degrow because it's killing us? So That's why I kind of like that European Environment Agency item that talked about growth without economic growth. It's a form of selective growth. Sir.
Hi, Randy. You're one of our eco warriors, and I salute you from when you're here for the Rainforest Action Network and now the Earth Advocacy Institute. Sounds very promising, so I appreciate that. What I liked especially was when you summed it up that what our problem is human supremacy or human exceptionalism that we see. And to me, the perverse irony we have here in the United States today is this pro-life movement that just seems to focus only on human babies and not realize that if they weren't pro-life for the web of life, those human babies aren't going to have much of a future either. And I think how do we mobilize what seems to be a pro-life movement to really extend themselves to the more than human world? We work with Our Children's Trust, which has the federal lawsuit, the constitutional lawsuit for 21 youth, Juliana versus the United States, which is suing that because we don't have a good national climate policy, their constitutional rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are in jeopardy. And so they're trying to press that into the court, the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens there, but anyway, it's really critical, I think, to deal with the web of life issues, and we're actually aborting all through this extinction of the more than human world. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I chose some of these words carefully, and some of them didn't even come from me. You know, I showcased my thoughts to other people, and they gave me some good comments. But when I said that humans need to stop thinking that we are the only important species on Earth, and instead to focus on a healthy planet for all. Now, most people will actually think all humans. They might not overtly, but that's what's in the brain, right? Because of human supremacy and the milieu that we've grown up with. But for me, it means all species, the entire web of life. And there are certainly some people in the anti-abortion, pro-life world that are not educable. And to that, we either ignore them or we outmaneuver them. But there's a whole lot of hundreds of millions and in fact billions of people around the world that are choosing to have less children. Brazil is in negative population growth, and most people don't probably even know that. China doesn't have to have its one-child policy anymore, you know, and most people do know. In fact, countries like Japan, you know, are struggling, and even Russia was struggling with population reduction, and so it does seem to be happening. And yet we do need to ensure that the education of girls and young women globally to increase their base of power and respect is important to the numbers reduction issue, hand in hand with affordable and available family planning and such. So that issue is out there, and the human supremacy is part of it. And for some of those people, we just got to ignore them or outmaneuver them.
That's good. Do we have any other questions? Just wanted to make a comment too about this. Pro-life is really the wrong word, because they're all really pro-birth. Life would mean that they cared about what happened to the child once it was born, but they don't. So I think we have to be clear that pro-life doesn't mean pro-life from that group of people. It's just pro-birth. Julianne, I think you want to come up? Oh, did you? That's, you were next, but that's okay. You'll be next. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Hi, thank you for being here and for your work. And I have a question about Stephen Donziger and that whole case of Chevron against the Native people and what's going to happen ever with reparations for all the damage in the rainforest. So what is your opinion on that and the horrible implications of what has happened to Stephen Donziger and other environmental attorneys, and then if you think that the money will ever be paid or the reparations will be made. Thank you.
Yeah, the case that she's referring to is down in the Ecuadorian Amazon, the tropical rainforest, where Texaco, which was subsequently bought by Chevron, so it inherited its legal liabilities. Texaco had deforested and toxified so much of that, and all kinds of cancer rates were breaking out with the indigenous peoples and other problems down there. To their credit, they're very well organized, the indigenous peoples of Ecuador. I mean, impressive. I go there quite a lot. I was there twice just before the pandemic, the year before the pandemic hit us. But and there's a project down there called Sacred Headwaters, which is about 2/3 the size of the state of California, where the indigenous peoples have organized to say, no more extractive energy, no more mining, logging, cattle ranching, palm oil, oil, gas, no more. And it's a really impressive project that Pachamama Alliance and Amazon Watch here in the Bay Area are helping them champion. But with the Texaco case and the particular lawyer, Stephen Denziger, who I did see recently out in Washington, D.C. at Union Station on the day that Marianne Williamson announced her campaign for the U.S. presidency. I live only about a 5-minute walk from there, so I went down to hear what she had to say, and everything she had to say was really quite impressive. But Stephen was there, so he's finally at least allowed to leave his house. He had one of those god-awful monitors on his leg, was under house arrest. The money was in the billions of dollars that the Ecuador and the native people were, the lawsuit that they hit Chevron with. You know, when it gets into the billions, you get attention even from a megalith like Chevron Oil Company. And we knew that they would amass their team to fight this and to work with what I would call corrupt judges to undercut Donziger. I don't know that the money will ever be paid out down there because, of course, Chevron moved its assets out of Ecuador. However, they have refiled in Canada, where Chevron has a lot of assets, and they have not given up at all. So there's still hope there for that kind of justice. But it has already done enormous good at capturing the attention of those economic pirates like the giant oil companies.
Hi, Randy. Your last comment kind of teed up my question. But if I were to ask, what gives you the greatest hope for us succeeding in this fight, literally for our lives or our future? And then what are the main things that, what are the absolute greatest threats? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, that word hope, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I prefer going forth with a good attitude. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not an optimist or a pessimist, I'm a realist. And I think that's an important distinction. And even where one may not see plausible hope, you can still go forth with a good attitude. And we've probably all heard that thing, what would you do if you knew it was the last day on earth? And the answer was, I'd plant a tree, right? And so I certainly want to go down swinging. But what I've laid out today, and a lot of that came from Andy Cambrell and his sort of brilliant mind to kind of construct these systems and pull things together. So you should try to tune into his thoughts. He will lay out a more kind of academic, intellectual framework of the systems shift, and it will include a few things that I did not talk about today, like technology policy, the unintended consequences of technology. So what gives me hope, Raul, is really when I see at least a plan on paper that's commensurate with the scale of the problem. And I think what I tried to lay out today is what was the phrase? Not hubris, but at any rate, meaningful. And so windows of opportunity, I said, we're opening up, and I do believe that's true. Change is happening more quickly. At the same time, all of the factors against us are going against us, right? And so it's a race against time. And like I said, we have got to be ready to jump through those windows with big ideas. And the kind of plan that I laid out today, and there's lots of people thinking on that level, and including people, that are thinking about putting the billions of dollars behind it to get it, to advance it further. are really out there, and that to me is exciting, you know. So I am shifting now to understanding plausible hope.
It's a great response.
Was there anything else I didn't address there?
Greatest threats.
Oh yeah, sorry. I thought there was something else. Yeah, well, that's a very good question, the greatest threat, but it's a tough question. Next question, please.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to bring up one of the greatest threats.
Okay, and I may try to think up one.
Oh, you will. Because it seems like one of the greatest threats is that we live in a war economy. And that is not talked about very often when we talk about environmental issues. Actually, where we tend to put our money in this country goes toward the military-industrial complex and war. We have been at constant war since World War II. So that is doing tremendous damage to the planet and to the ecosystem. So I wonder if you have anything to say about the allocation of funds that go toward war, how we could do something about that, because it's always at cross purposes with environmental sustainability.
Well, to the extent that war is often ecologically damaging as well, I'm thinking of in the Middle East when they Hussein lit all of those oil wells on fire. Subsequent to that, if we reduce, subsidies to ecologically perverse industries, it ought to include a lot of that military-industrial complex. So maybe there's a way that would meaningfully get worked into the plan, because if we're not addressing, the most severe threats, then we're, as they say, pissing in the wind, and that's not a good idea. So the war economy isn't talked about. If I think of other things as what worries the most, I guess I brought it up in the sense of what the other question that talked about human supremacy is thinking that we are the only important species on this earth. Anthropocentrism is the more academic term, and I'm trying to think of a writer right now who writes quite eloquently on that, but her book is called Earth Abundance, and she's got a whole chapter on that. So it really is about our worldview, and the shift to an ecological worldview would solve what I would see as the worst problem that we confront, and it's at the deeper level.
Do we have any other questions? Before I trip over this cord.
Can I ask one more quick one?
Sure.
A number of times you mentioned that the targets in terms of net zero.
Twice, only twice.
Okay. As I'm sure you understand, there's a lot of implications about net zero that involve offsets and what qualifies for offsets and all that. I prefer to frame targets in terms of specific carbon reduction goals, like 20% or 50% below 1990 levels, something like that. So I'd be interested on your comments there. Also, one other thing, based on what Georgia just said, there's a great book by Aviva Chomsky called Is Science Enough? I don't know if you've read it. You need to read that book. It's the best analysis supporting degrowth I'm aware of.
Oh, okay.
It's really good. And one of the things she told me that I never heard before, the United States in all its reports of greenhouse gas emissions never includes any emissions generated by military activity. That's off the table. That's 50%. Which just blew my mind when I heard that.
Yet another thing we have to add to our demand set.
Right. So any last question from anybody?
Well, I may address his point, though, about the phrase net zero
Yes, good.
as opposed to authentic zero. Right? In the world of climate, what that sort of has meant over the last decade is that, a business that maybe eats a lot of energy that comes from a coal-fired power plant and wants to greenwash to the public that they have, that they're environmentally responsible, might declare that they are net zero because they are paying for a eucalyptus monoculture in Guatemala to be planted to absorb that many tons of greenhouse gases, right? And so they can say, yeah, we emitted over here, but we captured over there, so we have net zero, right? And it is used for greenwashing. I think it's getting harder to do that. There are more certification programs that have an eye on that, though there aren't enough. One of my other projects is to create a 5-star certification for restoration projects, because it pisses me off that a eucalyptus monoculture can be called a restoration project. It is not, as we know from the Bay Area here in Australian eucalyptus trees that were brought over by, including Jack London from your neck of the woods here, who invested in that way back when. And they brought the wrong species, but it took off and it grows well. So I like eucalyptus. It is the second highest tree in the world. It is the tallest flowering tree, as the Australians like to tell us, you know, and they're gorgeous trees in their native habitat. A 5-star certification system would, you know, essentially to get 5 stars, it would be like reforesting a wildlife sector between 2 wilderness areas to mimic as best we could what those wilderness areas were like, right? And so I just had a meeting a couple of days ago down in Mill Valley with a company that has yet $1 billion sort of pledged for him to help broker with these carbon offset projects around the world, though his focus is on protection of existing forests, which is at least a cut above some of these restoration projects or reforestation projects. We need all of the above. We need to protect existing forests. I helped form an organization about 15 years ago called Forest Trends. It's based out in Washington, D.C., and it really was looking for market-based solutions to environmental problems, not the stuff that Randy Hayes at Rainforest Action Network did with my 19 arrests for civil disobedience, attacking the evil empire. Market-based solutions. You know, we do need, and I mentioned in my talk that we need more from the business community that are seeking to be responsible business people, because we really need that sector of society involved in this solution. So there's a lot of net zero stuff that is greenwashing. I don't endorse it. I'll continue to call it out. And then there's authentic zero. So Conservation International, I showcased their plan. To be honest, they're not my favorite group over the past because they raised a hell of a lot of money and I didn't see the there on actual on the ground protection. But like lots of us, we learn lessons as we go, and we want to help them implement that plan. It's very well constructed, and several of the targets that I laid out today came from that plan. And so we have to keep a wary eye for net zero for sure, and get to authentic zero, and that's our task.
Great. I think if we don't have any, you wanted to ask something? Go ahead. Sure. This will be our last one, promise.
Yeah. Thank you. You've mentioned plastic and businesses and foods and agriculture, and one of the things I've noticed is plastic packaging, and I was wondering if you could just say a word to that, whether it's trending more or less, and whether we have an influence when we ask our stores not to use much plastic, etc.
Yeah, I don't know the plastic world terribly well, but Jackson Brown's girlfriend has one of those organizations, Diane Cohen's her name, and that's fighting that. And there are other major ones, and Greenpeace has a major campaign there. I guess in terms of the plastic in the oceans, somebody here might know the statistic. It's hideously high. The preponderance of it is actually drift nets. You know, and hence why I mentioned drift net in my talk today, because, you know, I do care about the oceans, even though, you know, I love them rainforests. So plastic and plastic packaging, you know, I was in Indonesia some years back and scuba diving, and as I got closer to the surface, the yucky plastic packaging and wrapping was like wrapping around me, and it just was quite hideous to be in such beautiful waters with such wonderful people and to have that, you know, happening. So it's been elevated over the last 2-3 years to an issue of greater consequence, and there's more being done on that. And I don't focus on it enough to lay out any more specifics on that, other than plastic is a French word, plastique, and it just means malleable, right? And you hemp heads out here already know that a lot of plastic can be made from hemp, right? And so we can still have plastic that's biodegradable and such, and a lot of the chemists and good people are working towards that. So that'll be part of the process, but we really need to, you know, like a national bottle bill like we used to have, where as kids we picked up old pop bottles by the side of the road and turned them in for 5 or 10 cents, and then bought really healthy candy that, you know, was good for us, right? And so there are a lot of solutions that have to be manifested around that, and you know, but it is getting far greater attention these days.
Yeah, I just want to mention that Paul Hawkins' book Regeneration has a section on plastics and the problems in the ocean and what they've done. So I think with that, I'm going to thank you, Randy. This has been a wonderful presentation. Great, thank you, Lori. Thank you, everyone, for coming.